it needs to not be a text message. It needs to be an authenticator app that generates codes or another secure means of communications.
What's shaking? Welcome back to All In. I'm your host, Rick Jordan, and I'm bringing on an expert today in cyber. We're going to be educated. We're going to be schooled. Why? Because this dude is currently serving as the founder and CEO of both Breach Management LLC and Spiked Mace Software LLC. He is the first alumni to be appointed to the OSSM Board of Trustees, and now he serves on the academic committee chairperson and is a member of the executive board. This dude was also this is a long bio. I love it. He's a candidate for a PhD. Geoffrey, I hear you laughing, man, but Geoffrey Simpson, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm pumped, man, because we're going to talk about some pretty amazing things. But first, let's humanize you a little bit, because I'm reading right now that's stained glass artist. This wasn't in the original information that I got. That's amazing.
It's some of those things that kind of grab onto you. At least for me as a child, seeing those stained glass windows in those churches, and that love of that glass interacting with light has really stuck with me. And as the arts always fits with STEM, and my kind of creative outlet for a long time has been stained glass, and I love making stained glass lamps and really specific pieces that bring in art and glass, and that's really one of my muses there. So yeah,
that's incredible. I like your statement too that the arts always fit in with STEM, because they're separated a lot in a lot of conversations, and I've never seen it that way either. I've always seen myself as the freak of the unicorn that has the bridge between the left brain and the right brain. I've been in cyber, and I can, throw amazing complex enterprise systems together, at least that's what I've done. And then I'm also a musician. Really accomplished guitarist and drummer.
Yeah. And there's a beautiful art to laying out those enterprise systems too. And I partially fault the education to where they maybe gray it up too much, make it too boring. And mathematics and engineering and software and cyber and security, it's a beauty in and of itself. And there's so much creativity involved. Even those things, like you just said, laying out an enterprise network, and that flows right into playing guitar. And other musicians, same thing as well. Absolutely.
Yeah. Plus, there's a good outlet, because I don't feel that you should ever shut a part of your brain off.
Right.
And that's something that's always really centered me too, just like stained glass with you, I would assume.
Yeah.
Awesome, my man. Absolutely. So if we can dive into some cyber stuff today, I was told that you recently gave a lecture to the FBI.
I did. Yeah.
Did you give them a lecture, or did you lecture them?
I lectured them. Yeah, I gave them a lecture. So, the reason why I'm here today is because of my PhD research. And I kind of, I'm temporarily retired. I was able to, kind of go out, work in industry, start companies, do startups and stuff. Yeah. And I'm at a point in my life where, I'm a lucky person. I'll say that. And being able to go back to school and get the PhD has just been, awesome for me. But anyway, so I'm in, PhD program in computer science, and I'm researching the area of security economics. And specifically what I'm looking at is potentially malicious domain registrations by people that are registering these domains, trying to trick people into clicking these links, trying to attack them in business email compromise attacks. And of course, there's so many parts to cybersecurity, and business email compromise is one of the largest components of that financially. We've seen a lot of data from the FBI and their Internet Crime Complaint Center, IC3. Yeah. So if you're in the United States and you have some sort of cybercrime occur, that's who you report it to. You go to the FBI and their Internet Crime Complaint Center. And so they gave us some data that we were able to parse through and look at the actual data from some of these cases, some of these actual fraud cases from business email compromise. And that kind of spurred on some further research, down the line on what I'm looking at.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that you're really studying, or you're a candidate for your PhD in the economics of cybercrime?
It's a computer science degree, but my professor, Dr. Tyler Moore, is one of the computer scientists that testified before Congress in the Equifax breach. And so this area and this realm of computer science and cybersecurity is looking at the economics, what motivates these malicious actors? And then what is the cost to the companies to protect themselves? How much do you spend as an organization on cybersecurity and security in general? Because there is a point at which you have diminishing returns. You could spend another $1, but you only get that small incremental point. And, there's mathematical models that can show you these points. One of them is called the Gordon-Loeb model that models out the implementation wise, the spend, how much you need. But what you need is your estimated losses or potential losses. And when we look at business email compromise, we look at these cases from the FBI so we can get a good estimate of your potential losses from business email compromise. We can then plug that back into a number to actually say this is, kind of how much you should spend on security.
Is there a general ratio that you see with that, or even thresholds?
It comes down really when you start looking at the numbers, a lot of common sense comes into it because, and it's different when you really have to look at who you're talking about. Because when you're looking at a small mid-sized company, you might be able to easily describe the security infrastructure that needs to go on there. As far as like network security, physical security. And the interesting part of what I'm doing, and so, maybe you have a website, and as most people do, and I'll give this website from a company that's local to me, Williams.com. And so Williams spends all their money. They're a gas pipeline company, but they're really big on physical security and of course, cybersecurity and looking at the IoT security because they have lots of devices out in the field communicating. So big focus on that. But from the critical infrastructure side and like the domain aspect and the BEC side, somebody could go register VVILLIAMS.com. And that VV looks awfully lot like a W. And now they have a domain that they can start trying to sneak into emails and start trying to infiltrate Williams for some reason, trying to get them to pay a purchase order that suddenly shows up or request a check. And this is important because of state actors like Russia. And this is the exact attack that they used in the Burisma case, where they were trying to infiltrate Burisma. So they were using these types of malicious domain registrations to trick people inside the Burisma organization into clicking these things and giving them the credentials.
It's interesting that, because there's different threat actor profiles. That's what I was at the White House advising the previous administration on last year when they were looking at interagency cooperation for these types of things too, because that's a mess, as you know. The cooperation, especially on the cyber side between the and CISA was the way that they tried to start this up, and it's getting better. But the motivations behind the different types of threat actor profiles are very different. But
absolutely, yeah. And we see that, and University of Tulsa, where I'm getting my PhD at, we actually are one of the cyber core universities where they actually bring in undergraduates and train them in the ways of cyber attacks and defense. And at one point in time, we had an office of the Secret Service on campus because they were working so closely with the Secret Service and the government, and they train these students to do that defense and attack for the United States. And they go into the CIA and other organizations and do that. So, and those threat profiles, that's certainly a big aspect of what I do and what the other components in our, computer science college do. For
sure. And there's different motivations that exist. There are economic motivations for some, but when you're talking about state actors, it could be just geopolitical destabilization is their motivation. But when you look across the different types of profiles, some of the methods, exactly what you're talking about right now, business email compromise, are still the same methods used across all profiles and all motivations.
Absolutely. And so some of the data that we received from the FBI actually had like geolocation on it. So we were able to tell where the attackers were located, or at least where the recipient banks, like where they were transferring the money to, also where the victims were located. And so we were able to compare that to different things in the United States, trying to pinpoint, what's the main motivator for being a victim of business email compromise? And some of the thoughts that ran through my head is, okay, let's get a list of the public companies in the United States. And that's where all the business email compromise is going to be, because they're attacking the big companies. And I was like, no, it's going to be the banks. Where are the banks located? So we did all this analysis and ran it through the R scripts and looked at everything. What it turns out is the main indicator of being a victim for business email compromise is population density. So there is absolutely no factor that changes your percentage of chance of being a victim of business email compromise. So the answer is it happens to everybody. Yeah.
Wow, goodness. So you found it more centrally, when you say population density, that was the biggest determining factor that you saw as far as the amount of attacks?
No, that was where the victims were. And so,
Got you.
So if there was like a place, was more popular for being a victim, or, is there a worse place to live in the United States, or a safer place to live in the context of business email compromise? So there wasn't. But one of the super interesting things, we saw most of the attacks in the business email compromise attacks, they tried to steal between $10,000 and $100,000. So those are the majority of the attacks, but there were quite a few attacks in between that $100,000 and $1 million range. And what happens when you look at those numbers is, statistically, these malicious actors and these attacks were most successful at around $600,000. And so those attackers who were asking or trying to steal $600,000 were statistically more successful than the ones trying to steal $20,000. And there's a lot of psychology that can go into those numbers, but that's just astounding that, the more you try to steal, the more successful. I mean, it just kind of, those type of economics is really, when you look at it from a security context, that's really important to your business. And as you know, cyber's not just a box that you buy. It's so much training and it's so much people involved. Cybersecurity really is people. And in this case, things like training your employees to have a double verification on wire transfers, even though that may not sound like cybersecurity, boy, that sure is cybersecurity from my perspective and from the FBI's perspective.
No doubt. Just a couple of weeks ago, because of measures that we recommended one of our clients put in place for the double check measures on wire transfers, is what saved them from a $258,000 fraudulent transfer.
Yes, absolutely.
It was so intriguing because it's exactly what you're talking about. It was VIDN. And it was the same thing, instead of Williams with a W turned into two V's, the word ICE was in their name and an L was replaced for the I. It was just
exactly.
It was incredible to see this transpire, and the human aspect of it too is something that I preach all the time with this. So I'm really glad you're on that track. That was $258K. I'm stuck in the $600,000 a little bit in my head on why that was the case, but I know we could go into the psychology of that.
Yeah.
Do you feel that it's because the small ones? Because you see all the, we've been accustomed to the small ones for so long. I mean, all the way back to 20 years ago, it was like Prince Abu Dhabi, is stuck in some crazy country. Will you help me get the money across to my dear old grandmother? Right. We've seen those forever, and those were $1,000, maybe $5,000, something like that. But I mean, for me, if I would see something like, and I'm in this industry, if I would see something of $600,000, that could be fraudulent, I would actually double check to see if it's for real. Like, is this something I really need to pay? Because I don't know why, man. As I'm thinking about it, when you said it, it's just, why does that seem more legitimate? Because even when I think of it, it seems more legitimate to me at that dollar amount.
And I have a specific case. My wife is a chief accounting officer and treasurer of a publicly traded company. And so she gets to see a lot and do a lot. And she's very talented and smart. I'm definitely married up. But,
well done.
Being a chief accounting officer, she gets to see these things. And she had a controller that received an email. And the email was from, the name in it was Gary Fields, which happened to be the CEO of the company. And it was requesting a wire transfer for about $170,000. And it said for an acquisition. They just so happened, it was not public knowledge, but they were pursuing an acquisition. And if they had not had that voice to verification on the wire transfers, their company would have transferred that $170,000. Now, if you're a president or a CEO asking a controller of your company, and if you're a medium to large size organization, $600,000 is not that much money, really. It does not look different. It does not look out of place. And that's why some of those succeeded. I think on the lower end, there's probably a lot of embarrassment too, because the data that we're seeing got filtered through the FBI. So you can imagine if your business, let's say you lose $10,000, $15,000, maybe that's not that big of a deal. You're too embarrassed to report it. You don't want the negative PR associated with it.
Reputation damage is huge whenever it comes
absolutely.
to this.
So we're going to see a lot of those not even reported to the Internet Crime Complaint Center. And there's ignorance too. Maybe you don't even know to report it, even though that there's a potential for recovery about that. So that's part of the education too, to know that if something like that happens to you, certainly contact your local police, but also contact the FBI, because they can, if you contact them fast enough, and it's the case of a wire transfer, they do have a success percentage with recovering some of these wire transfers, even at the smaller levels.
That's phenomenal. I'm sure there's a relativity that's involved too, because like you were saying, $600,000 to a large public corporation would not be that much money. But then there's probably a threshold when you were talking about small and medium enterprises a little earlier. If you're doing 10 million a year, maybe even 1 million a year, that 600,000 might look more like 60K. Something, and that actually might be something that could tank you, Well, and you see a little breakdown in the smaller companies. Maybe you have a better grip on things. Your personnel have been there longer, or they know the system better. And the bigger companies with the more moving parts, it's easier to kind of slip something into the cogs there. So once again, maybe the psychology in a larger organizations, even though they should have the processes in place, sometimes those processes break down. And look, we're not just looking at these types of things in, that being a threat. We've seen, as you probably understand, these Outlook vulnerabilities to where people have been hacking into enterprise Outlook servers. And we've seen cases from the security economics when we're looking at these cases, these malicious actors actually intercepting emails on the Outlook server and rewriting, changing routing numbers inside of emails in the middle of the email transfer. Yeah.
So,
it's
there's
kind
ways
of
around
impressive,
that.
Isn't it?
It's absolutely impressive the extent they go to these links. But once again, the economics justify their actions. Their threat actor says they do this and they do have success, or they do have a high enough success. That's why it works. That's why they keep doing it. That's why it's still a threat, because we haven't fixed it.
No doubt. I saw that you state that there's different viewpoints between both the attacker and the defender for cybercrime economics. What do you mean by that?
Well, and so, the defender in these cases, it's even hard to nail it down to say it's cyber in a lot of these cases. And the attacker may just be purely economic motivated. And that's what we see a lot with these BEC attacks. And I know with the Burisma attack, that was my primary motivation in doing that. That was a state level attack looking at trying to get, I want to stay out of politics on that one, but that was a state run attack. So they had different motivations. But on the defender standpoint, when we look at things like this VIDN, the negative externalities may not be worth it for Williams to go out and buy up all these domain names just because there's a chance that somebody may register VVILLIAMS.com. And the attack may not even be attacking Williams themselves. The attack may be attacking Williams customers, because they may try to attack their customers. And so depending on what other business situation. And so when you look at even protecting as a company against these protections against these visual impersonation of domain names, do you want your IT guy or the person, not to demean the IT guy, or the person in charge of maintaining your domain registrations, do you want them doing all this? Or in the case that you have a copyright protection in place, is it your brand protection agency that goes out and says, oh, this may infringe on our copyright? So if somebody is registering, somethingwilliams.com, maybe that infringes on a copyright, and maybe not, because there's a lot of people on the internet and a lot of people named Williams, and it's very difficult. Microsoft can make a better case when people start using things like SharePoint and Outlook or Microsoft or Office 365, because that maybe falls under brand protection. But maybe it is a cybersecurity issue. And so there's still not a clear answer on how to protect this or who even does the protection on this.
That's a huge gap too, because it's as I'm thinking about even large organizations or even down at the small and medium enterprise level, who's the one that ends up taking the responsibility for this? And it's almost like, I mean, back in the days of, when the IT support and consulting thing just started, maybe 30 years ago, it was all a one-man shop, right? And that one person kind of did everything, and they really specialized in nothing when it came to technology. It was just so if they, grew up in enterprise systems, it was, well, sure, I can take care of your servers. Oh, you need phones too? I've never done that, but I think I can figure it out, so I'll just put that underneath my umbrella. But for even larger corporations, I can see this being a conundrum, because it's not like compliance, with HIPAA or something, to where you have to designate a compliance officer within your organization. Do we have a cyber awareness officer, that comes up? And how does this conundrum get fixed?
Right. And it doesn't even stop there, because, we mentioned just these one types of malicious domain registrations where they're replacing characters. But there's also other types. And one of the other ways the Burisma attacked, because they use multiple ways of business email compromise attacks. But one of the ways is they leveraged the use of their SharePoint. And so SharePoint, as we know, a Microsoft's hosted email platform. But when you sign up for SharePoint as a company, you get a domain name like mycompany.sharepoint.com. And this Burisma subsidiary had one of those. And so they actually registered, the subsidiary was Cub Energy, but they registered cubenergy-my-sharepoint.com. And that is one of the successful attacks that got into Burisma. But that type of attack kind of plays off this third level domain name. And when we talk about the third level name, I mean that, that first part of the domain name that we sometimes use, like the www.domainname.com or the mail.domainname.com, that www or mail, that's that third level domain name. And so what we're also looking into is what happens when these malicious attackers start registering things like www.williams.com. So that is another way that they could potentially trick people into clicking on these links. And so somebody has mailwilliams.com. And so, there's so many aspects of this that it just keeps going. As you know, with cyber, it's kind of that fractal landscape. It's so wide, and you can just drill down on any specific piece of cyber. And that's why it's so interesting to me and you, and so much to learn about it. I mean, I learn new things every day, and that's why I love what I do in research, and probably the same with you. Oh, no doubt. And it's interesting too, for me anyways. The interesting part is more so the economics and the psychology of it than the actual technology of it itself. Because the tech is just the mode, man, because everybody uses tech right now. But even, like I said, across all the different threat actor profiles and all their unique motivators, the methods of attack are pretty much the same across all of them. It's like the toolbox is the same toolbox across the board. But the economics of those different actor profiles too, do you see different financial motivators for each of those? We see some differentiation between the state level actors and what we maybe even call script kiddies to a certain degree. But, Thank you for that. I haven't heard that term in a long time. From some of our other research, we have actually seen some of these malicious actors algorithmically generate some of these malicious domain name registrations. And so we can see some indication that this may be part of a hacking package or a BEC package that a malicious actor would obtain off from the internet or something like that. So there is some motivation. We see some economic differentiation there. What is super interesting, though, is this type of attack, the VIDN stuff, started gaining popularity maybe 2000. Maybe we saw some evidence 2005, 2006, and it really wasn't much there, but it really started picking up in later years, 2015, 2016. And it really just spiked. And it happened. The data set that we're looking at, when we're looking at all these potentially malicious domain registrations, we actually had the name server information as well, and where they're registered at. it turns out that a large portion of those were actually registered through Vistaprint. And I don't know if you're familiar with Vistaprint, but they offer, like free business cards or 10 free business cards with a domain. They were doing a promotion where they were providing a free domain name when you sign up with them for free business cards. And they were not charging the card, your credit card, until 30 days after you signed up. And so the hackers, these malicious actors, figured this out, that they could get these free registrations. And so that's what caused a big spike in this type of attack. And then what we actually saw was that competitors to Vistaprint saw how Vistaprint was growing, even though a lot of that, or at least a portion of that, was malicious. And they started offering the same deal as well. And so we saw the malicious actors actually move their registrations from Vistaprint out to these other competitors. And Vistaprint started fixing that problem, fixing that hole. And so, ended up within very quickly, Vistaprint was no longer hosting these type of malicious domains, but it did kind of disperse to these other name servers and other registrars until it finally kind of weeded out a few years later. But it was so interesting to see the economics of Vistaprint offering a free domain, but not charging a credit card until 30 days after, causing this increase in BEC attack, and therefore causing larger theft and causing, cyber insurance premiums to increase. And so there's that, butterfly effect of chaos, once again, just showing its wings, that this little change over here affects, how much you're paying on your cyber insurance premium, which is,
Were they even, I didn't know about the Vistaprint scenario. Were they even authorizing, $1 or anything to make sure they were valid cards?
I can't go back in time and look at that. Going back as a historian now, or researcher with the data, we can go back and read news articles and see what the industry thought of what they were doing at the time. But I think they were not doing at least enough validation, or they're using debit cards. I'm not sure what the loophole was on why they're giving that 30 days. So,
That's mind-blowing. And of course, that was several years ago now at this point. And where are we at today, man? What's taking place right now to register these domain names en masse?
Yeah, well, the good news is there's no good news. No, the business email compromise is still on the rise. And so the FBI's Crime Complaint Center releases an annual report. And so the attacks are growing. As a researcher, my ultimate goal is to be able to just, say, oh, somebody registered a malicious domain name and you should do something about it. But the internet's just too broad and there's too many things to look out for. So
business email compromise. That's it. When you said it took off in 2015, of course, you and I know that it's been around for so long. And what's your opinion? And I'm stating it that way, phrasing it that way intentionally, because it's always with any client base that I'm a part of, it's education. That's everything we push. And even now coming to an email scenario to where we're utilizing vendors that don't just straight up block email anymore. Because I've determined with my team that it's more important for the person who's receiving the email to understand and notice some of the discrepancies that might exist with it. Because it's like teaching a man how to fish principle rather than fishing themselves. And maybe it's a bad phrase to use when we're talking about literal fishing, phishing. But rather than blocking it, there's more that's coming through. And now through integrations right inside Outlook or G Suite, it'll say, hey, this email looks like it has something a little funky to it. Here's what we see. Would you like to report this? Or here's specifically what we see, and then maybe you can analyze it on your own, or click here to contact your support team, whatever else. It's very educational based now, rather than technologically based, to where we're just slamming down the gauntlet and saying this is not going through, and then we have one person that can filter through these at some point, or like a quarantine report. Who likes quarantine reports? Really, nobody does. It's just another layer.
And that's the challenge, though, because as a researcher, I would love to be able to say, here's an algorithm, or here's an artificial intelligence model, machine learning model that tells you this is bad. Don't click on this.
Yeah.
I'd love to be able to write that. I'd be rich if I did that. But it's not that easy because even as I've explained, there's so many different ways to do this. And you ask what my opinion is, it is that multi-layered approach, because when you look at like a network security, I mean, you have a whitelist or you could have a blacklist and start blocking things out. Or you could start blocking any clickable URLs in an email. But it all comes down to training. Absolutely. And a lot of companies are moving to more secure communication methods between the vendors where it matters. And when I say secure, I mean something that has an additional layer of authentication, or at least any authentication whatsoever, because as we know, email is just completely unsecure platform. So if you're communicating things that are important to communicate, wire transfer IDs, account IDs, look at secure communication platforms. And if that's a Slack channel, that's a Slack channel, or if that's Microsoft Teams, we're really seeing more communication between companies like this. And large organizations, and I'm talking about the largest companies like Walmart, have their own communication platforms that they already have their vendors on. And so they're utilizing those type of platforms to perform all their communication between their vendors and suppliers on. And so that's a model that I could see moving from those big companies down into the small companies, because I really feel like there's an opportunity to guarantee a secure communication channel between companies doing business between each other, because email is just way too unreliable and unsecure.
Yeah, I see the same trends myself, and that those types of systems are making their way downstream. They've been used by a lot of the big corporations for a while now, and still on the inverse of that, email's not going away anytime soon. That's how everybody. Okay, talk about the economics. That's how you market, right?
Right.
That's if you go buy coffee like I do at Big Shoulders in Chicago, which is one of my favorite roasteries, man, here in Chicago. I order 5 pounds at a time from them. I love getting their 15% off coupons to place my next order. Yeah, so that's also economics, but the threat actors know this.
Yeah.
So
they do. And so once again, is it economically feasible for them, or is it economically advantageous for them to try and insert themselves into those type of scenarios? And so we've already seen that a little bit with text messaging. And I know I'm kind of veering away from, some of my research area here, but in a past life in some of my startups, we did text message, a wait list for restaurants, sending out text messages when your table's ready. And so I've heavily involved in text message marketing. And so the good thing in the United States is really the FCC cracked down on those type of things in the beginning. But when we see things like this data loss from Facebook that has names and telephone numbers, which is probably cell phone numbers, there's a lot of data online now that means people can start sending you text messages from, that may release another wave of, getting somewhere that is immediately viewable by the people. Text messaging have like a 98% read rate within the first hour. Yeah. And so that's a concern of mine. And, bringing that back to business email compromise and back to kind of enterprises and security, and we've kind of mentioned the multi-factor authentication, but when you have to have multi-factor authentication, and when it matters, it needs to not be a text message. It needs to be an authenticator app that generates codes or another secure means of communication. So
for sure, I was on stage a couple months ago, and I said, if nothing else, at least use a text, but please God, stop using text if you have something else available to you.
Yeah, and most of us, and me included, I have a lot of security by anonymity because nobody really cares enough about me to steal my stuff. Hopefully, I'm not changing that by being on a podcast or anything. But really, and most of us, and that's what it comes down to. As a security researcher, I understand that any data that's in electronic form can be stolen, and that's really what I want people to know and understand. And I still have data online, but I protect myself in the ways I think I need to, and you protect yourself in the ways you think you need to. I'm not scared to go online. I'm not scared to have my kids go online. So
yeah, right on. Same here. I'm not scared. And being an expert in this field too, and somebody that's very vocal, obviously, about this, I laugh at myself, and so do other people that work for me, because things like Netflix, my Netflix account or whatever, dude, they're the most unsecure passwords in the world, because I don't care. There's no way. I don't have a phone number on there. Yeah. The only thing I use it is to watch movies or whatever else, So if somebody logs in and I get that suspicious notification that somebody logged into my Netflix account from the Ukraine, I'm like, okay, so. But to your point, your phrasing when you said when it matters, and there's a lot of things that do matter, especially when it comes to business email compromise. There's a lot of things that do matter. So don't just brush over it. And when I was getting to the opinion piece too, I was curious on that, because from the perspective of, it'll never happen to me. We're out there, we're on a mission to help people understand that, no, it really can. It is all the time. Yeah.
And it does matter, because a lot of people are, in this economy, maybe moving to more of a remote work situation. Maybe they're doing more, freelancing, and it really goes back into understanding, maybe scare you into the repercussions of when you're responsible for maintaining PII. When I say PII, I mean personal identifiable information. If you have PII on your laptop or your computer and you're responsible for that, there are legal repercussions to you losing that. Each of the states in the United States.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. each of the states in the United States have their own data breach laws. And so part of what makes it challenging in the United States is if you have it applies to where your customers are, where the customers live. So if you have data from, customers that live in 5 different states, and you fall into this breach notification requirement, you would have to notify them differently in each of those 5 states potentially. And so that is something as a freelancer that you have to realize that you are legally required to maintain the PII based on, where the customers live. And to a certain degree, that means you might have to look at encrypting your hard drive or encrypting the data. And the BEC can happen to anybody. And even if you're a freelancer and you get an email and click on it, maybe it somehow grabs Excel files off your hard drive. And if those Excel files are not encrypted, maybe they just got your customer list and you happen to keep their Visa card numbers in there because you're in between accounting systems and you still need to bill them. It's real world consequences, and we're going to start seeing more, just like the United States just recently started, putting the reins on Russia for doing all these attacks. I think we're going to see local authorities start bearing down on some of these cyber breaches, because it's starting to become a problem.
For sure, once they get the right tools to do so as well, because from what I've seen as well, especially being at the highest levels in our country, looking at this, same as you, there is definitely a gap in competency and the tool set available between the federal government and, of course, local municipalities, the local authorities. It's getting better, in my personal opinion, which is great. I was laughing too, because when I choked Hunter Biden's name, and it has nothing to do with politics, with his laptop and everything, and I saw it, he's like, well, maybe it was lost. It's like, it has nothing to do with Republican, Democrat, or whatever. It has everything to do with the stupidness of a human being. To your point, Geoffrey, it was his responsibility no matter what. Anyways, I'll move on from that, because it's just a human aspect. That's all it is. Right. It has nothing to do with what team he plays for.
It comes back to cybersecurity, like we were talking about. There's such a big human aspect in everything around cyber, and it's coming down. You make decisions on your firewall when you set it up, and you make decisions on how to secure your network, and you make decisions on how are you going to protect your organization yourself against business email compromise attacks. And so these are things that really a lot of times involve human decisions. And so training is important. Processes are important, repeatable processes, and training is a part of that.
For sure. Let's end it with this, my man, because that's a good just bookend to this. What are some realistic ways, in your opinion, that some companies can protect themselves against VIDN or BEC?
Sure. And a lot of this is you have to know if you're a target or not. And I think a lot of the people that know they're a target know that they're a target. And I say that like Microsoft knows they're a target. They are actively looking at people registering domains that could be used in this type of scenario. And I mentioned SharePoint, and SharePoint is a big one because a lot of people use SharePoint. A lot of people are used to seeing a SharePoint URL in their emails. And so that is a big one. A big risk is anything that looks like SharePoint in their email. And so it comes back to training. What can people do? It's being on the lookout. There's no tools out there right now. And hopefully maybe one day I'll create tools that allow companies to go out and plug in their name and say, here's a list of potentially things you should look at. So right now it's not anything really to be concerned about. It really falls into the realm of your regular business email compromise training, which is training people to look at the URLs, not just what's on the text in the screen, but what is the actual href, which is the actual link it's going to, when you have your mouse hovering over it. And there's other tools certainly that you can integrate with your email that helps out with that and checks those and big things like that. But it does come back to training. And I know, there's a good way to do training and a bad way to do training. I think it was GoDaddy just this past Christmas tried to do some training with their employees to get them to not click on links in emails. And so they actually sent out an email saying, oh, here's your holiday bonus. And it was a link. And of course, a lot of people clicked on it. And it was under the guise of training for business email compromise, but maybe don't promise a holiday bonus in an email that's sent, So there's a good way and bad way to do the training. And so you don't want to make it boring because nobody's going to sit and listen to boring training. And you don't want it to make it too much of a requirement. It needs to be educational so people learn. And that's the ultimate goal, is that you want them to learn to look at links and maybe not click on everything. And it's okay to ask. It's okay to not click on the link, I guess is the best way to say it. It's okay to not click on the link.
Amazing, my man. Geoffrey, thank you so much for being on today. I've really enjoyed our conversation. And where can everybody find you? I know you want a certain level of anonymity, but hey, where can everyone?
Sure, I have a website, geoffreyssimpson.me. It's with a G, spelled with a G. I'm really not doing anything right now. I'm finishing it, really focused on the PhD. And so, after that's finished up, who knows what I'll be doing? I may be going back to startups and maybe getting a real job again. Well, who knows?
A real job. Man, thanks for making me smile today. Have a great day, brother.
You too, man.
What's shaking? Thank you for joining me on the All In Podcast. Click the subscribe button and smash that bell for notifications. Text me, 312-535-8520. Follow me on social media at Mr. Rick Jordan. See you next episode. I am Rick Jordan, and I approve this message.